Hello, everybody. This is your host, Aram Melkoumov, and you're listening to another Product Innovation Show episode. Every week, as you know, the guests that I have on our show talk about their stories and wisdom on how to ship a great product. On the show with me today, I have Meraj Imani, who's been delivering market-leading solutions to Fortune 500 companies, and currently works as the Director of Product Management at Fiix, one of the leading scale-ups. Miraj, pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for joining.
Awesome. Thank you for having me here. It's good to be here.
Awesome. So the first question I have is about your breadth of experience. So like I know you've worked in products in AI, B2B, mobile, SaaS. So you're quite a generalist. Um, was this a conscious career choice that you had?
I think it was unconscious at first. I was initially when I went to school, I was studying engineering. I was doing electrical and computer engineering. I come from a long line of engineers in my family, so it's kind of just it was an option already decided at some point. And then when I was in school, I kind of realized, I'm learning a lot, but about a very specific set of things.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, after a couple of years, I switched over to business where, yeah, one of those devils which switched from engineering to business. But I really wanted to learn about a lot of different things. So I think what happened was maybe out of necessity, I kind of got into product management, stumbled into product management at first and just ended up raising my hand whenever some project would pop up. Hey, who can help with this? Like, hey, I could do it. On paper, probably unqualified for most of them. But yeah, ended up doing them over the years. And I think it was a few years in, 2, 3 years in, that I started seeing the results. I'm like, okay, there's a lot of benefits to this. From one side, I could really think about risk management of a project because I've done the mobile side, I've done the API side, I've done the platform side, I've done the UX side. So I could really think about a broad set of things that could have applied to something that we're launching. But more importantly, what really worked for me was trying to think about things in a way that wasn't constrained to a box per se. The box that being what I owned as a product manager. Now that's my journey. That's what I went through based on personality, upbringing, and all of that, and requirements of the job. I firmly believe every PM that I meet goes through their journey, and
Mm-hmm.
what I went through is not necessarily the right thing for everybody.
And just out of curiosity, from these kind of different spectrums of product creation that you've gone through, which one do you feel like you learned the most, or there was the most to learn?
The most different one was applied AI, because that has a set of, that can be a very expensive. A lot of companies fail at it. And B, there's a kind of very defined set of things that you need to go through. It's like, how are you going to acquire your data? What's your data normalization like? And the third thing was the people I was working with were all PhDs, very smart, much smarter than I am. So that was very different, and in a sense that I also had to try to figure out, because again, that's one of the things I initially stumbled into. I had to figure out, all right, what can I bring to this equation? And I kind of realized, hey, yeah, if you set aside all of those things, we're still trying to solve a problem here. And what I can bring to the table is, in the like the context from the still context from the industry, from user requirements, the maturity of the customers that they need to be in, and also how would we prove out the hypothesis that the applied AI or the AI team is looking to prove out. So in a sort of market space. So that comes to mind as a very different set of steps that I had to go through that I wasn't necessarily familiar with before.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. Um, Wanted to ask you about your experience or I know you worked in B2B. Let me know if you also worked in B2C as well. I think you did, right?
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a couple of years back. Um, had a bit of a fear of missing out kind of a thing. A few of my friends went out to a lot of well-known B2C companies, and I'd never done B2C. They were telling me all these stories about, hey, look at this data science that we're doing on user behavior and all of that. I'm like, I want to be able to do that. So I did a bit of a pivot in my career, joined a B2C company in Toronto, worked with excellent people, and ended up learning quite a set of few things that I really didn't have exposure on when I was doing B2B. So for context, I was doing B2B SaaS product management for 8 or so years before I
Hmm.
joined that B2C. So I was used to, you have a user persona, you have a buyer persona, and we had like successful companies, but you're talking like thousands of weekly active users.
Yeah.
And I joined an environment which had something like hundreds of thousands of weekly active users, where your buyer is your customer, it's the same person. So there was a few good lessons there that I'm happy to talk about to the listeners and to you.
Yeah, I know it's great. I mean, I always like B2C because, as you said, your end user is your paying customer, so very easy to reach them, very easy to like get feedback from them. Whereas through B2B, your end user that's actually using it, you might not be able to, touch, right? So can you share with us some of your lessons from B2C that you learned and that you were able to apply to your B2B products?
Yeah, for sure. So when I was, like I mentioned, when I was in B2B, we're talking a few thousand weekly active users, trying to convince the buyer persona, and then also seeing, hey, helping out the user persona. So there's like certain set of things when it came to validation that, hey, you go through a particular set of things that you do. You set up some interviews, you talk to 10, 20 customers when you want to do validation, maybe you do some group sessions and so on. Um, that was not going to work because it just wasn't going to scale for me. Because even if I got 1,000 customers in, that was still a fraction of the people that were using our application. So I had to learn a set of new validation and de-risking tools that a lot of B2C people had already in their toolbox. So how do you, for example, run a good A/B experiment? How do you do a good painted door experiment? What do you need to do in order to do like a multivariable experiment? And with it, what's an experimentation framework? How do you divide up your experiment groups? None of this stuff I'd really been exposed to from a B2B side because I was working in scale ups. Scale ups is what I really enjoy working for, but you just don't get that kind of a user base. Uh, but they have been extremely helpful in bringing it to B2B because now we're implementing them at Fiix right now. We do experiments all the time. And the second thing that was really valuable was in B2B, you kind of think about how am I going to launch the next big thing? I'm going to launch this great new thing. It's going to change the market. Everybody's going to love it. We're all going to be millionaires. I think a lot of people are resonating, this is resonating for them. But with B2C, when you have like an established product, you're looking at aggregating half a percentage improvement here, a percentage there, 2% there. And in 6 months, all of a sudden you realize, okay, you know what? We are 50% better across the board. And
Hmm.
that is a very valuable thing. So that's another thing that I brought with me to the B2B world, which especially became helpful when defining like a product-led growth strategy and planning around it and what is it that we would be doing.
Oh, very interesting. Maybe for the audience, can you explain what a painted door is?
Oh yeah, painted door experiment is when you don't have something built, you're sort of wondering if it's gonna impact a particular behavioral outcome. And so you just put a link to it or a button to it or a call to action to it. And what that does is introduces the user to, hey, we have this, or can we talk to you about this, or is that something that you're interested in? It's important to have tracking for it. It's important to make sure that the placement that you're putting it in is the right placement because you may not just it's important to make sure that basically those factors help you ensure you're getting credible results at the end of the day, and that's the core and the foundation of any sort of experimentation that you might be doing.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. Um, you mentioned product-led growth. Let's talk about that. I know you're currently spearheading it at Fiix, and I believe you're trying to go up market. But kind of before we get there, why do you think so many people are trying? Why do you think so many people are getting product-led growth wrong?
Yeah, it's a great question. And before I get in deeper, I work with my team is amazing at Fix. We have great PMs that work on product-led growth and help other PMs to make sure their products are better. But to your question specifically, yeah, product-led growth is one of those buzzwords right now. Everybody's interested in it. It was applied AI like 6 or 7 years ago. So a lot of people went both feet in without really knowing, hey, what's going on? And they just knew that if you want to have exponential growth, you're going to need product-led growth. So I'm going to sort of list out a few things that people get wrong in what I think is a priority order, at least. Um, First off, the buying behavior. If your users are not, if your target market, just talking from a B2B perspective, your target market is not buying software in a freemium trial perspective, it doesn't matter. You can get all the other things that I'm going to talk about right, and you're still not going to get it because that's just not where your users are shopping. You're putting up your product for sale in some mall that nobody's going to, basically. So that's the first thing, is really trying to understand the buying behavior of your users or of your target market. The second thing I notice a lot of people get wrong are the goals and business objectives. It's like, why are we even doing this? Defining what that is and having the ability to measure it is going to be critical for the success of this project or this initiative that that any company takes on. I've seen a lot of examples of, why are you doing product-led growth? Oh, we're trying to get more users. It's like, okay, so is that your metrics? Like, oh no, actually, we don't really know what it is that we're tracking. Um, the third thing, and this is very prevalent if the last two things are very prevalent if your company hasn't started with product-led growth in mind and your product isn't necessarily set up for it. It's a big culture change, because a lot of what product-led growth is going to need to do impacts people whose job it is to do those things in the company today. So, for example, you have a marketing department that's in charge of customer communication, and you're a product-led growth product manager, you're a growth product manager, for instance, and you want to play around with some of those, with the timing, with the placement, with the content, and so on. And you'll find out, oh my God, they have their own roadmap, they have their own priorities. How am I going to consolidate that? So this is a culture change, and this is an org-wide initiative that really needs to be accounted for at the beginning. And finally, it's typically not quick. This is not going to be something that you're like, okay, we just turned it on, we're good to go, we're done. To do it right, you're going to be, as an organization, you're going to be tracking data for a while. You're going to be trying to create baselines for some time. You're building the muscle during that time period. You might have some wins. Hopefully, you get some quick wins under your belt as well and prove out that, hey, as a concept, it can work. But yeah, I wouldn't expect, if I'm setting expectations, I would definitely try to set that, hey, don't expect this to be changing the world within 6 months. This is a journey that we're going through.
Interesting. From your perspective, I mean, in a product-led growth organization, how who should marketing report to?
That's a great question. Uh, Product marketing, I think, should be part of report to Chief Product Officer. That I think, I've worked in environments where product marketing rolled into uh, Chief Marketing Officer, and and organizations with product marketing rolled into Chief Product Officer. I found more success in the second, because our goals are aligned. That's actually the main thing. Our goals are aligned, and we can embed product marketing much earlier in our conversations and really do like a 1-2 punch of product strategy and product execution together. Yeah, I can't stress enough how valuable I found partnership with product marketing over the years. Any successful product launch that I have in my portfolio has had a big part. Product marketing has played a very big part in it, and I'm thankful to all the ones that I've worked with.
No, I couldn't agree with more. I think it's sometimes I get into arguments with people about that. Like product marketing should report to the CPO. It's
Yeah,
the most
yeah,
aligned approach, right? Uh,
yeah,
so, so
absolutely.
so tell me, I mean, with at Fiix, how are you approaching a PLG?
Hmm.
You said sometimes it could be slow. It takes time. What were some of your growth pains that you had?
Yeah, for us, we are in our second year of the product-led growth initiative, and it started out as somewhat of a startup within the company. Uh, so kind of scrappy, trying out a bunch of things. But luckily, the things that we had going for us was the first two things, which were, hey, we knew our buyers buy like this in the market, and we had a very particular goal for it, which was reducing cost of acquisition, cost of customer acquisition in a very particular market segment. So we had these two going for us. What we didn't have a good enough handle on was means to measure user behavior. So that was kind of a challenge for us. We had some data lying in different places. Probably 80% of people listening, this is resonating with them, where data is just never available enough for you. And that was a challenge, which this actually ended up helping because as part of this initiative, we started consolidating some of that data, bringing it under the same umbrella. So for the first year, a lot of our focus was that and setting baseline for our metrics. We don't use anything crazy. We use the standard pirate metrics around acquisition, activation, and so on. But creating baseline around them was not that easy. But really, what happened in the last few months, we have those benchmarks now. So we know what are we doing, where are we doing well in, and where do we have opportunities. And we also have forecasting on individual ones. So we know moving this particular dial is the most worthwhile thing for us. And that's what we've been focusing on this year is really getting out of that startup phase, being
Hmm.
scrappy and really being deliberate with what we do and the things that we focus on.
Okay. All right. Excellent. I'm going to shift gears now outside of PLG. I want to ask you, with your experience and your background, to this day, what do you feel product directors or PMs do commonly these days that won't get them a great product?
Yeah, I'll talk about product directors first. Something that I notice is a challenge for product directors is the processes that they're implementing uh, are not set up necessarily to get to the organizational objectives. A lot of product directors that I've worked with, greatest of intentions, they're used to a very particular set of processes that they implement. So like, this is how we're going to do discovery. This is our discovery framework. This is how we're going to do solutioning. This is our go-to-market approach, and so on. And companies at different stages need different things prioritized. Different, if you're rewriting your platform in a new architecture, that is a very different set of processes prioritization than if you're mature product and you're just launching, you're sort of going through this aggregated growth basically. So I think my recommendation to the product leaders who are handling processes and so on is really take a step back and see what problems are the processes that they've implemented solving. And are they aligned with the corporate objectives, the business objectives that the product is supposed to get to? Is it going to get you to that vision in a time frame and with the quality that it needs to?
Hmm.
And I think there's some surprises there. A lot of people will look into it like, okay, yeah, maybe we're not doing that. We weren't doing that either. I will say, like, full transparency, we changed a lot of processes recently because we noticed, yeah, how we were doing things, it's just not going to get us to where we need to go in the time frame that's needed. And I'm sure we're going to face that again. In a few months, we're going to be in a different world where we're going to need to do some of our products need to go through a slightly different process. So I think this is always evolving and should always be looked at. It's not like done and forgotten about. From a PM perspective, my recommendation to all the PMs is to all think about the success metrics right at the beginning. You're planning to build something. How are you going to measure it? What does success even look like? I can't tell you how many times I failed at this personally. Early on in my career, we build this big thing and we're like, okay, how are we going to measure success? Like, oh my God, it's going to be like 2 sprints now to put in like trackers for everything. So it's just a lot easier to do it. And I've also had scenarios where, as we're defining the success metrics, we realize this is just not even worth pursuing. Because in order to reach what would be constituted as successful for a product, it may not be attainable at all, our approach or the product, the problem that we're solving for itself. So always start with these metrics earlier on. It will pay dividends down the road.
So what I'm hearing, I think, with product directors is align product goals to the organization as a big takeaway. And then for PMs, it's really having success metrics early on.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. We could just
No,
talk
no,
the whole
those are
time.
great.
We could talk
I
about
could.
this.
No, you nailed it. I think those are the two things that I most commonly see is missed as well. And sometimes it's hard, I think, to like have the foresight in order to see like what am I doing this for? Like what's like the goalpost or what's the success look like? It's a tough challenge for some people. Um, so yeah, thanks for answering
Yeah,
that.
yeah, no problem. Yeah, I think it's people start getting attached to the solution that they're thinking
Exactly.
about, and you kind of lose sight of the problem that you're solving for. So be attached to the problem, not the solution.
Perfect. Yeah. A couple more questions before we get into the fireside questions, which I always like ending with. So depending on the size of your organization, like we sometimes kind of even use this analogy as well, but a lot of smaller startups, some of their PMs, could operate as like a CEO, right? Or like a general manager, right? That kind of concept. Want to ask you, where do you think this myth comes from and, who PMs really are?
Yeah, it's a great phrase, right? Like PMs are CEOs, it's almost become like a proverb, like hey, your customer is always right. And no, we know that's not the case as PMs. It's like seldom the case. I've also heard some PMs say, hey, with great responsibility comes no power, which I think is really the product management life at whatever level you're operating in. Um, yeah, the history of it came from this American businessman, Ben Horowitz. I think I'm pronouncing that right. It's about 20 years old. It was in some memo, a good product manager, bad product manager. And I think really the objectives of it are misunderstood or being taken out of context, which was around responsibility. It's like, hey, you have a lot of responsibility. Uh, but where I think it's really gone to the wayside is I think it's given people a lot of misunderstandings. I think a lot of people got into product management for the wrong reasons.
Hmm.
And I think it attracted the wrong people to the product management as a career choice as well. If the most successful product managers in a long period of time that I know have always been collaborative, extremely humble, good storytellers, and have empathy. Um, and if you're coming in to product management with the expectation that, hey, you're gonna just boss people around, yeah, you might be successful short term, but long term, I haven't met anybody. And I just feel like that term just got people thinking the wrong way. They took the wrong aspect of it rather than, hey, no, you just have a lot of responsibility around all aspects of product management. But no powers, no powers, unfortunately.
That's true. Um, I think 20 years ago, oh man, I think it was a video I saw of Steve Jobs talking about a role of a product manager when it was like being defined early on. And I think, later on, I think Ben Horowitz, put that in like in a memo as well. And I think it was like a very different time in terms of like what a product man. It was like this new thing. Like everybody's like, "Ooh, what's what's this?" So they came up with this term and they made it as like this like all encapsulating type of role. I still feel like in some organizations they don't know what a product manager is supposed to do.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
It's kind of like a catch-all, you know, in occasion. So it's funny. I appreciate your point of view on that. A last question, Mirage, on this before we go to the fireside is you worked on a lot of products, different exposure to different things. What was your worst ever product feature you had to deal with? Like, why was it bad? Why did it fail? And how would you do it differently?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked on a lot of sort of challenging for different reasons products, but the ones that kind of immediately come to mind are those unexpected features, things that are not meant to be really a feature. It's like a bug, really.
Mm.
But it's now has broad adoption throughout your product. Um, and it hampers, it impacts how you actually go and upgrade. Um, Now, companies who are scale ups, which I have a lot of experience in, they have this all the time because when you're a startup, your focus is on, "Hey, how do I keep the lights on?
Mm-hmm.
How do I make most sales? Okay, let's build this one thing for that one customer and build it in a short amount of time." So I understand you just don't get to think about the long-term ramifications of it. So how I would do them differently, it's hard to say because I wasn't that person making that decision at that time. But I would recommend, something that if you have any QA professionals listening to this, I would recommend documenting these at least. If I'm making that decision, if I'm making some assumptions, if I've made some decisions, in all of the product discovery that we do at Fiix, questions and assumptions has a place pretty much near the top. It's like these are the assumptions we're making, these are the decisions we made from them. So at least you can go back if you're unable to make the right decision for whatever organizational need of that day. Uh, Future people who are looking at it and trying to sort of solve for it can go back and see, hey, why were some of these decisions made? This is like a low cost way of at least helping with some future proofing down the road. But yeah, it's really hard to say how I would do them differently because I just wasn't there and don't know what they were experiencing.
Yeah, I think documentation's create key, as you said. There's sometimes not enough of like a uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Like when write ups or documentation basically around like where did you get this decision? How did you get it? What was like the rationale? There's no like source of truth at times around like
Mm,
where do things come from. And I feel like sometimes people just skip that because they're like, oh, it takes too much time to write this stuff. It's like the same
mhm.
thing with like sales reps who hate doing the administration side of like
Yeah,
logging stuff into Salesforce and
yeah,
into HubSpot because like, ugh, I want to do sales, or it's like a
yeah.
product manager, I want to do product, I want to write stuff, documentation, but it's so key, it's so key.
Yeah, and to your point, like if you have that source of truth, that could be a living document. That's what we try to do is you're going to have to do some of the work anyway, and you're going to be documenting it in some tickets anyway. Why not have one source of truth where you put that in? And over time, you just build to it, build on top of it, and then you're good. You just don't have to think about it again.
Yeah. And where do you use, what do you use? Is it just Google Docs? Is it Atlassian, Jira, Confluence?
Yeah, Confluence and Jira, we
Confluence and
use
Jira.
those extensively. Yeah,
Okay, cool, cool. All right, ready for some fireside questions. So the format
let's do it.
is question, 1 to 2 sentence answers. All right.
Okay, let's do
All
it.
right. First question is: what should people start doing tomorrow to ship better product?
There's a thought experiment I recommend to people. It's not immediately going to get to good product, but over time it will. Which is when you're deciding on the scope, do a what's the best that could happen and what's the worst that could happen. You create these bookends. Oftentimes you might find that, hey, if you get something wrong, you're totally fine with the worst that could happen.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you get it all right, the best thing that could happen is not good enough. Oftentimes it's built somewhere in the middle, but it's a great way to get some consensus, especially in bigger groups when about what is it to build and how much of it that needs to be built.
Okay, awesome. Uh, what aspects of product development money can't fix?
Man, we talked about empathy already. I can pay people way more and doesn't make them any more empathetic. And something else that a lot of companies do, a lot of big companies do, is they fully outsource their product strategy. Goes to some consulting firm that doesn't build software. Has had some people working there that haven't built software in like 20, 30 years. Your product strategy can benefit from money being thrown at it from like some research, but not all of it. And so many companies do that. And every time it's a little piece of me just
Dice.
just kind of dies. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think a great story I remember reading was Hertz, and I love hampering on this one because Hertz hired Accenture, I think it was,
Hmm.
to redo their product development, like new web apps, mobile apps, and I think they spent $30 million, and they got zero at the end of the day.
Oh my God.
Like there was
Wow.
no result at the end of the day. They just kept like buying time and stuff like that, and Hertz ended up suing them for that amount.
Wow.
Um, and I just have a problem generally with big consulting agencies because you don't really know who's doing the work. They lack that empathy because it's typically
Yeah.
people in the back office or whoever that you never speak to.
Yeah.
And so they don't care.
It's almost like car rental is not their business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. All right, next question is would you at any point ask users what they want you to build and when not to do that?
It's, I often ask it if I know that it's not going to set expectations. That, just because sometimes I'm just curious where they would expect the solution to
Mm-hmm.
live. Not that that's what will be built. Um, a lot of the products that my team and I are involved with are fall under regulatory requirements. So a lot of our users are actually subject matter experts in those requirements. Now, that doesn't mean that, hey, we're going to exactly build it how they are asking for, but we rely heavily on some of their expertise and some other expertise to help us understand at least the boundaries and the sets of requirements that we need to abide by. But yeah, I sometimes just ask them, like, hey, where do you think this would be? Where do you expect it to be, or how would you expect it to work? Just to sort of see their perspective on their expectations.
Okay. All right. And another, question is, at what point can you throw money at a product problem?
Money at a product problem if it's not a you don't if the knowledge having it in house won't matter. Great candidate to throw some money at it. If it's a one-off, integrating with some other company's product, throw some money at it. Or if it's a distraction, potential distraction to the roadmap, and services can help with it.
Mhm.
That's another way of just throwing some money at it and forgetting about it and solving a problem, basically.
Okay. Great. And what do you believe that other people think is insane?
Oh man. So I believe that streamlining user experience is not always right. It's okay if I explain it a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
If some of your listeners are like me, their physician uses like digital notes basically, and they'd be going over them, and some other physician might have some notes added there, or the nurse, or some other practitioner. And typically, just because I'm somewhat familiar with this, there's a note approval that needs to happen. And just imagine you're sitting with your physician, and they're going to go through the notes. They don't look at anything, just press approve. Well, approve is on top of the screen. Typically, you've removed the friction of them having to scroll and acknowledge that they've read all of it. But it's completely missed the point. of the objective of the problem that was really meant to solve. The problem that was meant to solve is make it easier, put it in one place, but you still want the user to read it.
Hmm.
You still want the user to acknowledge that they've read it. And streamlining that process, I think, has just completely missed the point on that one.
I think also you could overthink design crazy, and you know you'll never really know if it's the right way ultimately at the end of the day. So it's so true. All
Yeah,
right,
for sure.
last question for you, Miraj. Advice to a 30-year-old self, personal, career, whatever.
Yeah, have try to always have fun at work. Went through this stage that I was hyper focused on getting to the top as fast as possible, and I really stopped having fun at work during that time. It's totally contrary to who I am, how I think work should be done. So most of my life at work,
Hmm.
so might as well be enjoying it. But yeah, that was a mistake that it was actually around when I was like 30, 31 that I made. So
Okay.
yeah, never again.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you, guys. Thank you for sharing that and for answering all these great questions. So I think that's a wrap. So Miraj, thank you so much for coming on our show and sharing all your wisdom of yours of experience with our audience. And as always, thank you to all of our listeners for tuning into the show, supporting the show, and following us. So Miraj, thank you so much.